65.9% of students fail to reach grade level reading by fourth grade, and they rarely catch up. They're at risk of dropping out of high school and going to prison. Sad but true. For the next 20 minutes, I'm going to share with you how to help dyslexic students win. I want to thank you for being here. Thank you for the opportunity to share. Before I share how to help dyslexic students win, is it okay if I share a little bit about my journey and how I became a dyslexia specialist? Back in the late 1990s, I had two children, one in first grade, one in third grade, and I was a room mom when they were both kinder and first graders. And I was fascinated at how the teachers were so heroic teaching these kids how to read and how to write. And I felt if they don't learn to do this after first grade, they're going to struggle the rest of their lives. And I remember my daughter had to stay after school a couple of times a week for several weeks to catch up on phonics. And then I remembered my son had to go to summer school between first and second grade to practice his reading. They were concerned that he might struggle in second grade if he didn't have a handle on phonics. So that inspired me to go to school and help other kids who weren't fortunate enough to have both parents at home or just who needed that extra lift. So I got my credential and my master's and started working in the general ed classroom. And I started seeing so many smart, bright kids who just couldn't read, and I wasn't understanding it. And one of my friends recommended that I try to get my special ed credential and a master's. So I did. I returned to college, received a special ed credential and a special ed master's, and I worked in special ed. And I did everything I could to help kids read, and there was still something preventing them from breaking the code. And I actually worked in several districts and then worked in a private setting. And I worked with second through eighth graders, and I started developing my own curriculum when I realized, all the kids struggle with phonemic awareness. The principal at the school asked me to teach a summer school course, and I had students from all out of the community coming to see me for summer school. And in 6 weeks, what I was using helped them so much. I had learned about using music to retrain the brain. So music is sent in the left ear while I play the spelling exercises in the right ear. But that's the end of a 9-step reading program. So these students who used music and phonics were making 1 to 3 year gains in 6 weeks. That's right. It's pretty amazing. So I went to the school system, different districts, and it's pretty out of the box thinking. This is 15 years ago. So I decided to have my own private practice, and I traveled, and I worked in 5 different districts as a supplemental education provider. And I was seeing kids make 1 to 3 year gains in 6 weeks. It was predictable. So there was a student in Pomona who was being raised by her grandfather. Her mom was in prison, and she was a bright, intelligent, dyslexic student. She fit the mold perfectly. Her grandfather said they had tried everything and they were going to give us a try because he had hope in the music. So after 2 weeks, he started noticing a big change, and he said that she's getting along at home and she's more excited to go to school. And then after 6 weeks, I shared with him that she had made 3 years gains in reading vocabulary, reading fluency, and reading comprehension. He started crying and he asked me, "What are you doing? This is a miracle. Are you a doctor?" He said, "Our home used to be a battlefield and now we all get along. She used to hate going to school. Now she enjoys it. She gets along with her peers and she does her homework." So when he asked me, "Am I a doctor?" that really struck in my heart. I decided I have a call in my life to bring this information out about how profound music is on the brain when learning to read. So I went and got my doctorate. It took me 7 years to get it, but I did the after-school program for 12 weeks instead of 6. I was under 2 internal review boards, and the results were amazing. Kids were still making great gains. Half the group did not use music, and they entered from the 10 to 20 percentile up to the 40 percentile range. With the music, the students entered in the 10 to 20 percentile and went up to the 60 percentile range, which is just under proficient. So there you have it. I created an app called Dunking Dyslexia. It plays spelling exercise in the left ear and spell music in the left ear and spelling exercises in the right ear. And I developed a reading program called Step by Step Reading. So dyslexic students no longer have to be held back, feel dumb, or feel stupid, and they don't need to be moved ahead without knowing how to read. The problem is lack of trained teachers, limited budget for professional development, lack of awareness of what dyslexia is, and when teachers see the struggling readers, they don't know what tools to use. I needed to learn about the music. So as a result, students have low self-esteem. They're having detentions, going to Saturday school. They're dropping out of high school, ending up in prison, and some committing suicide. And it doesn't have to be that way. We need a fast and affordable program to share with teachers. So here's how we help dyslexic students win. I use the acronym COPS because I've seen many parents with middle school and high school students just throw their hands up and say, I don't know what to do with my child. I leave it all up to the teacher. And a lot of times the cops end up getting involved. So the C stands for our reading crisis. We have a national reading crisis, whereas we are dropping rapidly. In 2015, there was a mandate signed by Governor Brown that required schools to assess for dyslexia and provide intervention for the 2017-18 school year. Well, there's an organization called National Association of Education Progress, NAEP is their acronym, and they look at the scores of 4th and 8th graders across the nation to determine how we're doing as a nation. Well, even after the mandate and after $700 billion spent nationally, we are still declining in reading. 8th graders have dropped 3%, and 4th graders have dropped 1%. It might not sound like a lot, but let me ask you a question. How many of you ever got a C- in a class and you were so glad to get the C-, get me out of here? I'm just glad I passed. Anybody like that? That was me learning French the first time around. But when I got a C- in math, my professor said, I can give you a D+ and you could take it over. Because if you get a C-, you're going to struggle on all the other courses. So I took that course over, but I accepted a D+. Well, our nation is getting C-, lower than C-. Proficiency is a C- or above. And we are hovering at the basic level, which is far below proficient. So this impacts all of our communities. O stands for opportunities. We can give our struggling readers opportunities with a multisensory reading program. Sam Orton and Anna Gillingham were the founders of reading programs back in the 1930s, 40s, and 60s. And they said that dyslexic students need a multisensory reading program. Kids have to be learning auditorily, visually, and kinesthetically with hands-on. How many of you learn better when you're listening? How many of you learn better when you're seeing? How many people need to have hands-on to really understand a concept? Well, back in the 1930s and 40s, dyslexia was known as word blindedness. But now we know it is dyslexia, and the reading program has to be multisensory, but it also has to be structured, systematic, sequential, and cumulative. We have those kinds of systems in our home daily. So this was going to help the dyslexic kids be successful. People like Winston Churchill, Steven Spielberg, Walt Disney, Cher, Tom Cruise, the Fonz, all of them were dyslexic, and they were very successful in life. P stands for prison. Did you know that 85% of inmates in prison have dyslexia? So if we can help the kids at the second, third grade level before they even get to 4th grade, start raising those scores. A friend of mine who works at a popular university teaching criminal justice said that when he worked for the Department of Justice back east, there was a state that looked at the 3rd grade illiteracy rate to determine how many prisons to build. That is so sad. In California, we spend $13,000 per general ed student. Special ed brings in twice that much for a special ed student. The prisons bring in $42,000 per inmate. So 1 in 5 students has dyslexia. S stands for success. What does success look like? How many of you are grandparents or parents and love to read to your children or grandkids, and they love to read to you? We used to go to the library and bring back stacks of books. My kids weren't dyslexic. They were general ed students that still struggled with reading. So phonics is very tricky. General ed students need help as much as special ed students and often students after school who struggle with reading. So I feel what I've done by creating this app, which has music in the left ear and spelling exercises in the right ear. Look at dyslexia as somebody reading from the wrong side of their brain. So the left side of the brain is the language center. Imagine the right side of the brain taking over the reading. It wants to send farm instead of from, or it wants to send kelp instead of clap. So the kids can't read the words right. And how does that impact their comprehension? However, if you put music in the left ear and it goes to the right side of the brain, it gives the right angular gyrus a job it likes to do. Listen to music. So we can send spelling exercises in the right ear, which will cross to the left side of the brain. And it's like doing Pilates in the brain, and it will strengthen the left side of the brain. That's the answer. That's what the research showed when I did my doctorate. So also what's happening is the central part of the brain, the corpus callosum, is being bypassed. So we have input in both ears called the dichotic method of learning. But because we're doing language and music, we're enhancing the lateralization. There's that special word. Dr. Roger Sperry was a scientist in the 1960s. You may recall the split brain theory. He worked with seizure patients and he severed that corpus callosum of seizure patients, and he worked with the left and the right sides of the brain independently. He said back in the 60s, if educators could ever grasp this information and bring it to the classroom, we'd have some breakthroughs in our classes. He was seeing word blindedness back in the 60s. So 20 years later, he won a Nobel Prize for his findings, 20 years later. So the woman who mentored me back 15 years ago with her reading program and music, she saw one of Dr. Sperry's colleagues. His name was Dr. Gazzaniga. He worked at UC Santa Barbara, but she was at his conference in Germany. And she designed this reading program to have music and spelling at the same time. But she didn't have a 9-step program. So my step-by-step reading follows the Orton-Gillingham model, which is a standard for all the schools. The 9 steps, I can talk about to you what those 9 steps are a little bit later if you want to ask me in your questions. But it's Orton-Gillingham based, and now I have an app. So the music is digital and the spelling exercises are there. So what are the signs of dyslexia? Students will glance and guess. They will try to memorize words. So when they see an unfamiliar word, they're not going to be able to pronounce it. They often don't punctuate their sentences, and they don't know how to capitalize. You'll see capitals and lowercase all throughout their sentences. Often you have to ask them to read back to you what they've written. So because of poor phonological awareness, when they write, they often misplace letters and syllables, and they'll spell kelp instead of clap, spot instead of stop. That could be dangerous. They have difficulty memorizing the days of the week, the months of the year. And the effects of dyslexia are huge. Reading failure leads to low self-esteem, increased poor behavior, and it can lead to those detentions in Saturday schools. And we need to know dyslexic students are not lazy. It's not that they're not trying enough. I have a friend who is an ice carver, ice sculptor, and he's an adult dyslexic man. He wrote a book, and he describes in his book that when he was a first grader, his dad would hit him in the head and throw him against the wall and call him lazy and dumb. Well, self-esteem is hard hit with dyslexic students. And we need to understand what the students specifically need. I think the call of God is for all students to read, and it's for us to be successfully reading across the nation. I want to thank you for listening to this presentation, and if it's touched your heart, I hope you reach out to me and I can give you a little bit more information how you can support training teachers. Thank you. Bye-bye.